Look at this. Cosplay grandpa came shopping. Bet that jacket's older than us combined.
The bell above the door of Hennessy's Surplus and Outfitters chimed once, soft, the way it had for 19 years, and an old man stepped inside. He moved slowly, leaning on a wooden cane worn smooth at the grip, his free hand pressed against the doorframe for balance. He wore an M65 field jacket the colour of old olives, faded at the elbows, mended twice at the cuffs in a stitch, only a wife who loved a man could have made. The webbed belt around his waist had given up its buckle somewhere on the walk over from the bus stop. His shoulders were narrow, his hair was white. He looked, to the three young men by the tactical wall, like a costume left over from a yard sale. "Look at this," one of them said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Cosplay grandpa came shopping," the two with him laughed. "Bet that jacket's older than us combined." "Bro, he's still got the 70s stitched into the cuffs." The old man heard them. He didn't turn his head. He walked, one careful step at a time, toward the counter at the back, where the owner had just looked up from a clipboard. If you believe a man's service should outlast the noise of those who never served, type Semper Fi in the comments before this story goes any further. Because what happened in the next 90 seconds inside that small surplus store on a quiet Tuesday afternoon was the kind of thing most people will never see in their entire lives, and the three young men who started it would spend the rest of theirs trying to make it right. His name was Earl Whitaker. He was 78 years old. He lived 2 miles away in a one-bedroom apartment over a laundromat, and he had taken the city bus to get to the surplus store because he didn't drive anymore. Hadn't for almost a year since his eyes had started going. He had come for a belt. The buckle on the one he was wearing had snapped on the walk to the bus stop, and the jacket, well, the jacket was the only piece of military clothing he had kept after coming home in the summer of 1970, and he wore it the way some men wear a wedding ring. His wife Margaret had mended the cuffs the year before she died. He had not been able to bring himself to send it to a tailor since. "Afternoon, sir," Dale Hennessy said, setting the clipboard down. He was 55, broad in the shoulders, with a greying high and tight, and the careful posture of a man who had spent 26 years in the United States Marine Corps before opening this shop. "What can I help you find?" "A belt," Earl said. His voice was quiet, almost soft. "Webbed, if you have it. Same width as the old one." He set the broken belt on the counter, the buckle dangling by a thread. "Yes, sir, I've got just the thing." Dale turned to the wall behind him, pulled down a fresh OD green webbed belt with a brass slide buckle, and brought it over. "This'll do you." "Thank you," Earl said, and he reached for his wallet. That was when Dale's eyes dropped, almost involuntarily, to the collar of the field jacket. There was a small embroidered patch sewn just above the lapel. It was faded, the threads worn flat by decades of folding and unfolding, and the slow chemistry of sweat and time. It was the kind of patch a man could miss if he wasn't looking for it, and most men wouldn't be. But Dale Hennessy had spent 30 years of his life looking for it, or one like it, on the chest of every old Marine who walked into every reunion and every Legion Hall and every parade he had ever attended. Beside the recognizable Force Recon insignia, the parachute and dive mask crossed over a winged dagger, was a second patch, smaller, an arrowhead with the word Recondo embroidered in gold thread that had gone almost the colour of brass. Dale Hennessy went completely still. The three young men by the tactical wall didn't notice at first. One of them was still chuckling about something, but the silence behind the counter had a weight to it, and weights of a certain kind changed the air in a room. Dale set the belt down on the counter, carefully, with both hands, the way a man sets down a chalice. "Sir," he said. Earl looked up at him. "Would you come with me for a moment?" Earl said nothing. He nodded once. Dale walked out from behind the counter, and he did not walk fast. He matched the old man's pace, step for step, his right hand hovering near Earl's elbow but not quite touching it, the way a son walks beside a father. They moved past the three young men, who had finally gone quiet, sensing that something had shifted but not understanding what. Dale did not look at them. He led Earl to a small wooden chair near the front window, the one he kept for older customers who needed to sit while their orders were rung up, and he eased him down into it with the kind of gentleness most men only ever use on their own grandfathers. Then Dale Hennessy walked back to the front door of his own store, flipped the deadbolt closed with a click that everyone in the room heard, turned the open sign to closed, and pulled the shade down over the glass. "Hey, the tallest of the three young men started. "Are we—" "Stay where you are," Dale said without looking at him. His voice was low and even, and it brooked no further conversation. "You're not in trouble. You're going to want to see this." He walked back to Earl Whittaker, and he knelt down on one knee in front of the old man's chair, so that their eyes were level. He took a breath. His hands were trembling, which had not happened to him in 19 years. "Sir," Dale said, "were you on Team Hotel 3? Earl looked at him for a long moment. His pale eyes were watery and very far away. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Out of Pubai," Dale said. "First Force Reconnaissance Company, spring of 69. Earl nodded again. He said nothing. His hand was on the head of his cane and his knuckles were white. "April 14th, Dale said. There was a 4-man Marine patrol that took fire in the Ashau. 3 were extracted alive. 1 was killed. The body could not be recovered. The valley was hot for 3 weeks. The Air Force wouldn't put a chopper back in there. Battalion Command wrote the kid off as unrecoverable." Earl was looking at the floor now. 3 weeks later, Dale said, a 6-man team went in on foot, against orders, from a lateral grid coordinate, walked for 2 days, recovered that boy's body and walked back out. One of them, a man named Cardenas, didn't come home. The rest did. The Marine Corps brought that boy home to his mother in Wisconsin in a closed casket. She got to bury him. She got to put a stone over him. The mission was never written up. The records were sealed. No citations were ever issued because officially the operation never happened. Earl Whittaker's eyes had filled with water, but he had not yet let it fall. "Sir," Dale said, "that Marine you brought home was my brother. If you've made it this far and you can feel what is in this room, type Semper Fi one more time, because this is the kind of moment that does not happen in a country that has forgotten how to make them. This is the kind of moment a man waits his whole life for and does not get." Dale Hennessy had been 4 years old when his brother Tommy came home in that casket. He did not remember the funeral. He remembered his mother kneeling on the carpet beside the box and putting her forehead down on the wood. He had spent the next 30 years of his life reading every memoir, every after-action report, every scrap of declassified paper he could find from that valley and that spring, trying to learn the name of even one of the men who had walked into impossible ground to bring his brother out. He had never found it. The records, the ones that mattered, were still sealed, and now there was an old man with a broken belt sitting in a wooden chair in his store, and the old man had his brother's name in his mouth without ever having spoken it. "Tommy," Earl said. The first syllable came out broken. "Lance Corporal, he was 19. "Yes, sir." He had a picture in his helmet liner, his mother and his little brother. The little brother was in a cowboy hat. Dale closed his eyes. Tears were running freely now down his face. He didn't try to stop them. "That was me," he said. "I was 4. My dad had bought me that hat for my birthday 2 months before Tommy shipped out." Earl's voice was very quiet. Cardenas was the one who promised him. When we got to him, Tommy was already gone, but Cardenas had told him on the radio before the first extraction that we wouldn't leave him out there. Cardenas held him to it. The rest of us went because Cardenas wouldn't go without us, and he didn't make it back. We made it back. We brought your brother home. Dale Hennessy put his forehead down against the old man's hand, the one on the cane, and he wept. He wept the way a 4-year-old boy weeps. He wept the way a 55-year-old Master Sergeant of Marines is not allowed to weep in front of anyone in his life except this once. By the tactical wall, the 3 young men had taken off their caps. They were standing very still. The tallest one, the one who had started the jokes, was holding his cap in both hands in front of him the way a man holds a hat at a graveside. It was 20 minutes before Dale could speak again. When he did, he asked Earl Whittaker if there was someone he could call. Earl gave him a name. Dale walked to the counter, picked up the phone, and dialed a number from memory, a number he had kept in his wallet for almost a decade, on a card that had gone soft at the edges from being taken out and looked at. The man who answered was Colonel Frank Marizzi, United States Marine Corps, retired of First Force Reconnaissance Company. Colonel Marizzi was 81 years old. He lived 43 minutes away by car. He had commanded a sister team in the same area of operations in the spring of 1969, and he had never stopped trying, in his long retirement, to track down the surviving members of Team Hotel 3, so that he could put their names into the historical record before he died. He had found 2. The third, the team leader, he had never been able to locate. The Marine Corps had no current address. Earl Whittaker had moved 7 times in 55 years. He had not been to a reunion. He had not joined the Legion. He had wanted, very simply, to be left alone with his wife, and after she was gone, with her memory. The Colonel drove 43 minutes in 31. When he came through the door of Hennessy's Surplus and Outfitters, he was wearing a grey windbreaker and old khakis, and he was unmistakable for what he was the moment he stepped into the room. He stopped when he saw the old man in the chair. He stood at attention. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then he walked across the floor and he saluted and he said, "Master Sergeant Whittaker, I have been looking for you for 30 years, sir." Earl Whittaker put his hand on the head of his cane and pushed himself slowly to his feet. He returned the salute. His back, for that one moment, was very straight. "Colonel, on behalf of the United States Marine Corps and the families of the men who came home because of you and your team," Colonel Morisi said, "I would like to apologize for taking this long to find you." Earl shook his head. "I wasn't lost, sir. I was just home." The three young men by the tactical wall watched all of this in a silence so complete that the ticking of the old wall clock above the door sounded loud. The tallest one, the one who had called Earl Whittaker a cosplay grandpa 35 minutes earlier, was the first to step forward. His name was Tyler. He was 22. He had just spent $600 on tactical gear that morning because he thought it looked cool. "Sir," Tyler said. His voice cracked. I'm so sorry. I didn't know." Earl Whittaker turned his head and looked at him. There was no anger in the old man's face. There never had been. There was only the quiet patience of a man who had seen a great many young men get something wrong before they got it right, and who had carried home a 19-year-old who never got the chance. "Son," Earl said, "the gear doesn't make the man. The man makes the gear. You boys will learn that if you want to." Tyler nodded. He was crying openly, the way a boy cries who hasn't cried since he was small. The other two were behind him, and they nodded too, and one of them said very quietly, "Yes, sir." Dale Hennessy did not sell Earl Whittaker the belt that afternoon. He gave it to him. He gave him a new buckle for his old belt as well, and he put the field jacket on the counter, and he replaced 2 of the patches that were coming loose with stitches a Master Sergeant of Marines remembered how to make. He told Earl, in a voice still thick from the last hour, that there would never be a charge for him in this store. Not for anything. Not for the rest of Earl's life. Colonel Maurice drove Earl home. They sat in the car outside the laundromat for a long time before Earl got out. They had a great deal to talk about after 55 years. The 3 young men came back to Hennessy's Surplus and Outfitters the following Saturday, and the Saturday after that. Dale ran a small food pantry for veterans out of the back room of the store every Saturday morning, and from that week onward, he had 3 new volunteers, with no tactical patches on their clothes anymore. A year later, Tyler walked into a recruiter's office and signed his name on a line. Earl Whittaker died 18 months after that Tuesday afternoon. He died quietly, in his sleep, in the small apartment over the laundromat. Colonel Morisi delivered the eulogy. Dale Hennessy was a pallbearer. So was Tyler. There were 41 Marines at the funeral in dress blues, standing in a long single line in the cold, and at the end of the service the Colonel pinned a silver star, finally, 56 years late, on the lapel of Earl Whittaker's old field jacket, the one Margaret had mended at the cuffs, the one he was buried in at his own request. The bell above the door of Hennessy's Surplus and Outfitters still chimes when a customer walks in. Some days it's an old man with a worn cane and a faded jacket. Some days it's a young man in new gear who doesn't know yet what any of the patches mean. Dale Hennessy treats them the same way now. He looks them in the eye, he calls them sir, and if the young one happens to laugh at the old one, the way 3 boys laughed on a quiet Tuesday afternoon a long time ago, Dale Hennessy steps out from behind the counter, walks the old man to the chair by the window, locks the front door, and tells the boy a story. If you believe an old man's worn jacket can carry more honour than 100 new ones, if you believe a Marine never stops being a Marine, and if you believe the men who walked into impossible ground for someone else's brother deserve to be remembered by name, subscribe to this channel, share this story, and type Semper Theo one more time in the comments below. Because somewhere, right now, there is an old man on a city bus on his way to buy a belt, and the rest of us owe him the dignity of knowing what he carried home.